On a freezing night in Chicago, a starving 60-year-old homeless man stole a warm loaf of bread from a bakery. The owner chased him, until the man slipped, collapsed bleeding and fell to his knees begging for his life. Instead of calling the police, the owner did the unthinkable. He knelt down, cleaned the man's wounds and fed him like a human being. What the man didn't know was that the next morning, a billionaire would walk into the shop and reveal a secret that would change his life forever. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. Subscribe and hype because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The wind cut through Chicago like a blade that December night. Harold pressed himself against the brick wall of an alley, trying to escape the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. His coat, thin and torn at the elbows, did nothing against the chill. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a proper meal. 2 days, 3, time had a way of blurring together when you lived on the streets. His stomach growled, a hollow ache that had become so constant he barely noticed it anymore. But tonight, it was worse. Tonight, the hunger felt like it was eating him from the inside out. Harold shuffled down the empty street, his worn shoes scraping against the icy pavement. Most shops had closed hours ago, their windows dark and unwelcoming. But ahead, one storefront still glowed with warm yellow light, Marcus Mart. A small grocery and bakery. He stopped across the street, staring at the lit window. Through the glass, he could see shelves lined with goods. And there, on the counter near the door, a basket of bread. Fresh loaves, probably left over from the day's baking. Harold's throat tightened, his hands trembled, and not just from the cold. He'd never stolen anything in his life. At least, not that he could remember. The accident 10 years ago had taken so much from him, including most of his memories. But somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't who he was, this wasn't what he did. But God, he was so hungry. Harold stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the shop. A man moved inside, tall and broad-shouldered, wiping down the counter. The owner probably. Harold waited, hoping the man would leave, would lock up and go home. But the minutes ticked by, and the man kept working. Harold's stomach clenched again, more painfully this time. He thought about walking away, finding a shelter, begging for help. But the shelters were full this time of year, and he'd been turned away from 3 already this week. His pride had kept him from begging on street corners. Pride, what a joke. What did pride matter when you were starving? Before he could stop himself, Harold crossed the street, his heart hammered in his chest as he approached the door. Through the window, he could see the man had moved to the back of the shop, his back turned. Harold's hand touched the door handle. It was unlocked. He slipped inside, the warmth of the shop hitting him like a wave. For a moment, he just stood there breathing in the smell of bread and coffee and heat. It was almost enough to make him cry. His eyes locked on the basket, 3 loaves of bread, crusty and golden. His hand shot out, fingers closing around one of the loaves. It was still slightly warm. Without thinking, without breathing, Harold turned and rushed back toward the door. "Hey!" The shout made Harold's blood run cold. He pushed through the door and ran, his old legs moving faster than they had in years. Behind him, he heard footsteps pounding the pavement. "Stop! Come back here!" Harold's lungs burned, his legs screamed in protest. He clutched the bread to his chest like a lifeline and tried to run faster. But the sidewalk was slick with ice, and his worn shoes had no traction. His foot slipped. For one terrible moment, Harold felt himself suspended in the air. Then he crashed down onto the concrete, his knees smashing against the curb. Pain exploded through his leg, sharp and immediate. The bread tumbled from his hands and rolled across the sidewalk. "Please," Harold gasped, not even trying to get up. Blood seeped through his torn pants, warm against his skin. "Please don't call the police." The footsteps stopped. Harold looked up, expecting anger, expecting to see a phone already at the man's ear. But the man just stood there, breathing hard, staring down at him. He was younger than Harold had thought, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His face was flushed from running, but his expression wasn't angry. It was something else, something Harold couldn't quite read. "Please," Harold said again, his voice breaking. He struggled to his knees, his injured leg throbbing. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I was just so hungry. I haven't eaten in days. Please don't call them. Please." Marcus looked at the old man kneeling before him. At the wild matted gray hair and beard that obscured most of his face. At the clothes that were more rags than garments. At the way his whole body trembled, though whether from cold or fear or pain, Marcus couldn't tell. And then Marcus looked at the bread lying on the sidewalk between them. A single loaf, worth maybe $3. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind, words she'd spoken to him when he was just a boy. "Marcus, we came to this country with nothing. People helped us. Never forget that. Never forget what it's like to have nothing." Marcus let out a long breath, watching it fog in the cold air. He bent down and picked up the bread, brushing off the dirt. Then he looked at the old man again. "Can you stand?" Harold blinked, confused. "What? Can you stand up?" Marcus repeated, his voice gentler. "Now." He held out his hand. Harold stared at the offered hand like it was something from another world. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took it. Marcus pulled him to his feet, and Harold bit back a cry as his injured knee nearly buckled. "Come on," Marcus said, putting an arm around Harold's shoulders to steady him. "Let's get you inside before you freeze to death out here." "I don't understand," Harold whispered. "Neither do I," Marcus admitted. "But my grandmother would haunt me if I left an old man bleeding on the sidewalk on a night like this." He helped Harold limp back to the shop. The warmth inside felt like a blessing after the bitter cold. Marcus guided him to a chair near the counter and disappeared into the back. Harold sat there, dazed, his knee throbbing steadily. He looked around the shop, with different eyes now. It was small but clean, with shelves neatly stocked. Behind the counter, he could see into a kitchen area where an oven glowed warmly. Marcus returned with a first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. He knelt in front of Harold and carefully rolled up the torn pant leg. The scrape was nasty, the skin torn and bloody, but not as bad as it could have been. "This is going to sting," Marcus warned, and began cleaning the wound. Harold flinched but didn't pull away. He watched as this stranger, this man whose shop he'd just tried to rob, gently cleaned and bandaged his knee. Tears pricked at his eyes, hot and unexpected. "Why are you doing this?" Harold asked, his voice rough. Marcus didn't look up from his work. "Because you need help. Because we're all human. Because it's the right thing to do." He finished wrapping the bandage and sat back on his heels. "What's your name, Harold?" "I'm Marcus." He stood and moved to the counter, picking up the loaf of bread that had started this whole thing. "Are you really that hungry, Harold?" Harold nodded, not trusting his voice. Marcus disappeared into the kitchen. Harold heard the sound of the oven opening, smelled fresh bread baking. A few minutes later, Marcus returned with a plate. On it was a thick slice of bread, still warm, butter melting into it, and a steaming bowl of soup. "Eat slowly," Marcus advised, setting the plate in front of Harold. "If you haven't eaten in days, you don't want to make yourself sick." Harold stared at the food. His hands shook as he reached for the bread. He brought it to his mouth and took a bite, and the taste of it, warm and rich and real, broke something inside him. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he chewed. "Thank you," he whispered between bites. "Thank you." Marcus just nodded, and busied himself closing up the shop for the night, giving Harold privacy for his tears. But inside, Marcus's heart ached. He thought of his own struggles, the times when he'd been close to losing everything. He thought of the kindness strangers had shown him. And he thought about how close he'd come to calling the police on a starving old man over a $3 loaf of bread. Harold ate slowly, just as Marcus had told him to. He broke the bread carefully, his movements practiced and precise despite his shaking hands. He soaked it in the soup, savoring each bite like it was his last meal on earth. Marcus watched him from behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts. There was something about the way the old man handled the bread, something almost elegant in his movements despite the dirt and the rags and the desperation. When Harold finally finished, he set the bowl down and looked at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes. "I never stole before," he said quietly. "I don't think I did anyway. I can't remember much from before. There was an accident, and," he trailed off, his gaze distant. "You don't have to explain," Marcus said. "I want to." Harold's voice was stronger now, fed and warm. "I want you to know I'm not a thief. I'm not a bad man. I'm lost, and I've been lost for a very long time. Marcus came around the counter and sat in the chair across from Harold. Where are you staying tonight? Harold shrugged. There's an overpass a few blocks from here. I have some cardboard there. Not tonight, Marcus said firmly. It's too cold. You can sleep in the storage room. There's a cot back there. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Harold's eyes widened. I couldn't. You can, and you will. I'm not sending you back out into that cold, not with that knee. Marcus stood. Come on, let me show you. As Harold followed Marcus to the back room, limping on his bandaged knee, he couldn't stop the tears from flowing again. He'd been treated like trash for so long, invisible on the streets, that this simple act of kindness felt like a miracle. That night, lying on the narrow cot in Marcus's storage room, warm and fed for the first time in days, Harold cried himself to sleep. But for once, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of hope. Morning light filtered through the small window of the storage room. Harold woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the warmth, the softness of the blanket, the absence of wind. Then memory flooded back, and he sat up quickly, wincing at the stiffness in his knee. He heard sounds from the front of the shop, the clatter of pans, the hiss of the oven, footsteps moving with purpose. Marcus was already working. Harold pushed himself to his feet, testing his injured knee carefully. It hurt, but the pain was manageable. He made his way out of the storage room, and found Marcus in the kitchen, elbow deep in dough. Good morning, Marcus said without looking up. There's coffee on the counter. Help yourself. Harold poured himself a cup with shaking hands and took a sip. It was strong and hot, exactly what he needed. He stood awkwardly, not sure what to do or say. Marcus glanced at him. How's the knee? Better. Thank you. Harold hesitated. I should go. I've imposed enough. Where are you going to go? The question hung in the air. Harold had no answer. Marcus shaped the dough and placed it in a pan. Look, I could use some help around here. Nothing heavy, just sweeping, organizing shelves, maybe helping in the kitchen if you're up for it. I can't pay much, but I can give you meals and let you sleep in the back room. Fair trade. Harold stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I need help, and you need a place to stay. Because maybe we can help each other. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron. What do you say? Harold's voice caught. Yes, thank you. Good. You can start by sweeping the front. Broom's in the closet. Harold set down his coffee and found the broom. As he swept, he marveled at how clean Marcus kept the shop, how carefully everything was organized. This was a man who took pride in his work. By mid-morning, Harold had swept the entire store and was helping Marcus restock shelves. He moved carefully, reading labels, placing items with precision. Marcus noticed the attention to detail. You're good at this, Marcus commented. Harold smiled slightly. I like things organized. I think I used to be particular about order. Before, they worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Marcus called from the kitchen. Harold, can you come help me with something? Harold found Marcus pulling trays of dough from the proofing cabinet. Can you help me shape these? Just watch what I do first. Marcus demonstrated how to fold and shape the dough, his movements quick and efficient. Your turn. Harold reached for a piece of dough, and the moment his hands touched it, something shifted inside him. His fingers knew what to do. They moved with a sureness that surprised him, folding and shaping the dough with practiced ease. Marcus stopped what he was doing and watched. Have you done this before? Harold stared at his own hands, watching them work. I don't know, I don't remember. But it feels, he searched for the word, familiar. You're doing it perfectly, Marcus said quietly. The way you're folding it, the pressure you're using, that's not beginner's luck. That's muscle memory. Harold shaped another loaf, then another. Each one came out uniform, professional. When they went into the oven, Marcus checked the temperature without asking, and Harold found himself saying, 450 degrees for the first 10 minutes, then drop it to 400. Marcus turned to stare at him. That's exactly right. How did you know that? Harold shook his head slowly. I don't know. They continued working, and Marcus kept noticing small things. The way Harold knew exactly how long to let the dough rest, The way he could tell by touch when it was properly proofed. The way he handled the loaves with care, like they were something precious. During their lunch break, they sat together in the back room. Marcus had made sandwiches, and they ate in companionable silence until Marcus spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Harold nodded. "You said you had an accident, that you can't remember much from before. How long ago was that?" Harold's hand stilled on his sandwich. 10 years, maybe more. I woke up in a hospital with no idea who I was, no identification, no one looking for me. The doctors said I had a severe head injury. They kept me for a few weeks, but when I was stable and no one came for me," he shrugged. "I was released. I've been on the streets ever since. No family, no one. If I had them, I can't remember. Sometimes I get flashes, images, feelings, a woman's laugh, a child's voice, but I can't grab onto them. They slip away like water." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, so am I." Harold took another bite of his sandwich. "But today is the first day in 10 years I've felt like maybe I'm worth something. So thank you for that. You were always worth something, Harold. You just needed someone to remind you." That afternoon, they worked side by side in comfortable rhythm. Harold's hands seemed to know things his mind didn't. He knew how to score the top of the bread for the perfect crust. He knew how to tell when a loaf was done by the sound it made when tapped. He knew how to fold in ingredients without overworking the dough. Marcus found himself relying on Harold more and more. The old man might look like he'd been through hell, with his matted gray hair and beard covering most of his face, with his worn clothes and worn-out shoes. But when he was working with bread, something in him came alive. As evening approached, and Marcus was closing up for the night, he turned to Harold. "You know, I think you might have been a baker once. Before the accident." Harold looked down at his flour-dusted hands. "Maybe. I wish I could remember." "Maybe you will," Marcus said gently. "Sometimes memories come back when you're ready for them." That night, Harold lay on his cot again, staring at the ceiling. His hand still felt the phantom sensation of dough, the way it yielded and stretched under his fingers. Somewhere in his lost past, he had known this craft. He had loved it. And for the first time in 10 years, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find his way back to whoever he used to be. The next few weeks settled into a routine. Harold arrived early each morning, helped Marcus with the baking, cleaned the shop, and served customers. He remained quiet, staying in the back when the shop was busy, but Marcus noticed how the regular customers warmed to him. There was something gentle about the old man, something trustworthy despite his ragged appearance. But Marcus's worry grew with each passing day. The rent notice had come last Tuesday, $1,500 more per month starting next quarter. Marcus had sat at his desk in the tiny office, staring at the numbers until they blurred. He was barely making ends meet as it was. The neighborhood had changed. Once bustling with families and workers, it had slowly declined. Shops closed. Buildings fell into disrepair. His regular customers were loyal, but they were fewer every month. And the new people moving in didn't buy artisan bread. They bought whatever was cheapest at the big chain store 3 blocks over. Harold noticed the change in Marcus's demeanor. The younger man had grown quiet, distracted. He spent long hours at his desk, poring over ledgers and papers. "Is everything okay?" Harold asked one afternoon, as they cleaned up after the lunch rush. Marcus looked up from the supply order he'd been reviewing. "Just business stuff, nothing for you to worry about." But Harold did worry. This place had become his refuge, his home. Marcus had saved him, given him purpose. The thought of losing that terrified him in ways he couldn't express. The trouble started on a Thursday evening, just as Marcus was locking up. 3 young men appeared at the door. Marcus recognized them from around the neighborhood, part of a local crew that had been causing trouble for months. The leader, a kid who couldn't be more than 25 with a spider tattoo on his neck, knocked hard on the glass. Marcus hesitated, then opened the door. "We're closed." "We know." Spider Tattoo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're not here to buy bread. We're here to talk business." "I don't have any business with you." "See, that's where you're wrong." He pushed past Marcus into the shop, his 2 friends following. "This is a nice place you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Get to the point. Neighborhood's getting rough, you know. Lots of break-ins, vandalism. But we can help with that." We can make sure your shop stays safe. Spider Tattoo ran his finger along the counter. For a small fee, let's say $500 a month. That's called extortion. That's called insurance. His smile widened. Think about it. We'll be back in a few days for your answer. They left, and Marcus locked the door behind them with shaking hands. Harold emerged from the back room where he'd been watching, his face pale. Marcus, I know. Marcus leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. I know. The next day Marcus tried to focus on work, but his mind kept circling back to the problem. He couldn't afford to pay protection money. He couldn't afford not to, either. Not if they made good on their threats. The shop was already struggling. This could be the thing that broke him. Harold watched him worry and felt helpless. He tried to work harder, to somehow make up for being another mouth to feed, another burden on Marcus's shoulders. On Saturday the crew came back. This time they weren't smiling. Marcus was serving a customer when they walked in. The customer, an elderly woman Marcus had known for years, took one look at the three men and hurried out, leaving her change on the counter. So, Spider Tattoo leaned against the counter. What's your answer? I can't afford it, Marcus said flatly. I'm barely keeping this place open as it is. Can't afford it or won't pay it. Both. The young man's face hardened. That's disappointing. Real disappointing. He picked up a loaf of bread from the basket, squeezed it until it deformed, then dropped it on the floor. You should reconsider. Get out of my shop. We'll be back. And next time we won't be so nice. They left, and Marcus picked up the ruined bread with shaking hands. The message was clear. Next time it wouldn't just be bread. That night Marcus sat in his office long after closing, staring at the bills spread across his desk. The rent increase. The protection money he couldn't pay. The dwindling customer base. The numbers didn't add up. They hadn't added up for months. Harold knocked softly on the office door. Marcus, you should go home. Get some rest. I can't rest. Marcus rubbed his eyes. If I lose this place, Harold, I don't know what I'll do. This shop is all I have. My grandmother's dream was to own a bakery, but she never got the chance. I built this for her memory. And I'm going to lose it. There has to be something we can do. If there is, I can't see it. Marcus looked at Harold, and for the first time the old man saw real despair in his eyes. I'm sorry. I know you're counting on this place too. I'm letting you down. You're not letting anyone down, Harold said firmly. You saved my life. Whatever happens, I won't forget that. But inside, Harold felt panic rising. If the shop closed, where would he go? Back to the streets, back to sleeping under overpasses, back to the cold and hunger and endless empty days. He couldn't go back to that. He wouldn't survive it again. And Marcus, kind, generous Marcus, who had shown him more compassion than anyone in 10 years, didn't deserve to lose everything he'd worked for. There had to be a way to save the shop. There had to be. Harold just didn't know what it was. Across the city, in an office that occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, Alexander Grant stood at his window, looking out over Chicago. From up here, the city looked clean and orderly, the streets laid out in neat grids, the lake stretching to the horizon like a promise. It was a lie, of course. Down at street level, the city was messier, harder, full of struggle and pain. Alexander knew that better than most. His assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Grant, the meeting with the development team is in 10 minutes. Cancel it, Alexander said without turning around. Sir? Cancel the meeting, Patricia. Reschedule for next week. Is everything all right? Alexander finally turned to look at her. Patricia had worked for him for 15 years. She knew when something was wrong. It's the anniversary, he said simply. Understanding crossed her face. Of course. I'm sorry. I should have remembered. I'll clear your afternoon. When she left, Alexander walked to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a simple wooden box. He lifted it out carefully, reverently, and opened it. A single loaf of bread lay inside. Not a real loaf. This one was preserved somehow, hard as a rock, dried out but intact. It was 10 years old, the last bread his father had ever baked. Alexander picked it up, weighing it in his hands. It was light, almost weightless, but the memory of it was heavy as stone. His father, Franklin Grant, had been a baker. Not a businessman, not an investor, not anything impressive by Chicago standards. Just a baker in a small shop on the south side. But he'd been the kindest man Alexander had ever known. Alexander closed his eyes and let himself remember. He was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table watching his father shape dough. Franklin's hands moved with practiced ease, folding and pressing, creating something beautiful from flour and water and time. "Why do you like baking so much, Dad?" young Alexander had asked. Franklin smiled. "Because bread is life, son. It's been keeping people alive for thousands of years. When I make bread, I'm part of that tradition. I'm feeding people, keeping them strong. There's no shame in that. There's only honor." "But we're so poor," Alexander said. He was old enough to notice that his clothes came from thrift stores, that they lived in a tiny apartment, that other kids had things he didn't. His father set down the dough and looked at him seriously. "We have enough. We have food. We have each other. We have purpose. That's not poor, Alexander. That's rich in the ways that matter." He reached over and ruffled his son's hair. "One day you're going to do great things. You're smart. You're ambitious. You'll probably make more money than your old man ever dreamed of. But promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll remember where you came from. Promise me you'll use whatever success you find to help people who are struggling, the way we struggled. Can you promise me that?" 8-year-old Alexander had nodded solemnly. "I promise, Dad." And he had kept that promise. Over the next 20 years, Alexander had built an empire. He'd started with nothing, less than nothing really, because after his father disappeared, there had been debts. But he'd been smart and ruthless when he needed to be, and lucky when it counted. Now at 38, he was worth more money than his father could have imagined. But he'd kept his promise. The Grant Foundation invested in small businesses, particularly bakeries and food services. He'd helped dozens of struggling shop owners keep their doors open. Because he remembered what bread had meant to his father. He remembered what it meant to be hungry, to be poor, to need help. Alexander set the old bread back in its box, and sat down at his desk. His computer screen showed the day's emails, dozens of them. Investment proposals, business opportunities, requests for meetings. One caught his eye. The sender was named Marcus Delgado, and the subject line read "Small Bakery Seeking Investment, Grant Foundation." Alexander opened it and began to read. "Dear Mr. Grant, my name is Marcus Delgado, and I own a small bakery and grocery store on the South Side called Marcus Mart. I'm writing to you because I've heard about the Grant Foundation's work supporting small food businesses, and I'm in desperate need of help. My grandmother came to Chicago from Mexico with nothing but dreams and determination. She never got to own her own business, but she taught me to bake, and she taught me to serve my community with dignity and pride. I opened Marcus Mart 5 years ago in her honor. Business was good for a while, but the neighborhood has changed. Rent is increasing, customers are fewer, and I'm facing pressure from local gangs demanding protection money I can't afford to pay. If I can't find investment capital soon, I'm going to lose everything. But here's the thing, this shop isn't just about me. I employ 2 part-time workers, and I've recently taken in an elderly homeless man who had nowhere else to go. He helps around the shop, and in return, I give him meals and a place to sleep. His name is Harold, and he's one of the kindest people I've ever met. If I lose the shop, I don't just lose my grandmother's dream. Harold loses his home, and this neighborhood loses one of the few places that still cares about quality and community. I know you probably get hundreds of requests like this. I know I'm not special, but I'm asking you to consider helping me save something that matters, not just to me, but to everyone who depends on Marcus Mart. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Marcus Delgado. Alexander read the email 3 times. Something about it resonated with him. Maybe it was the mention of the grandmother who taught Marcus to bake, the way his own father had taught him to value honest work. Maybe it was the part about the homeless man, the simple decency of giving someone a chance. Or maybe it was just that today, of all days, the 10-year anniversary of his father's disappearance. He needed to believe that there were still people like Marcus in the world. People who helped others without counting the cost. Alexander picked up his phone and dialed Patricia. "I need you to set up a site visit for me." "When?" "Tomorrow. First thing." He looked at the email again. "And Patricia? This one's important." That night, in his penthouse apartment, Alexander stood at the window again, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, his father was either dead or living a life Alexander couldn't imagine. The police had investigated, but after 10 years, the case was cold. Franklin Grant had simply vanished one day, leaving behind nothing but questions and the bread in the wooden box. Alexander touched the window glass, his reflection superimposed over the glittering city lights. "I'm still keeping my promise, Dad," he whispered. "I'm still helping people. I hope, wherever you are, you'd be proud." The city offered no answer. But tomorrow, Alexander would visit a small shop on the south side. He would meet Marcus Delgado and his homeless employee. And maybe, just maybe, he could do something good. He owed his father that much. Alexander Grant's car pulled up in front of Marcus Mart just after 9 in the morning. He sat in the back seat for a moment, studying the storefront. It was humble, tucked between a closed laundromat and a check-cashing place. The sign was hand-painted, the windows clean but old. This was exactly the kind of place his father would have loved. "Wait here," Alexander told his driver. "I'll be a while." He stepped out of the car and immediately caught the smell. Fresh bread baking. The scent transported him instantly back to his childhood, to standing in his father's shop, watching magic happen in the oven. Alexander pushed open the door, and a bell chimed. The interior was small but immaculate. Shelves lined with goods, a counter with a register, and behind it, he could see into a kitchen area where someone was working. A man emerged from the back, wiping his hands on an apron. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and the look of someone who'd worked hard all his life. "Good morning," the man said with a warm smile. "You must be Mr. Grant. I'm Marcus." They shook hands, and Alexander felt the calluses on Marcus's palm, the grip of someone who needed dough every day. "Thank you for coming," Marcus continued. "I know you're a busy man. Can I get you some coffee? And you have to try the bread. It just came out of the oven." "Coffee would be great." Marcus poured 2 cups and led Alexander to a small table near the window. As they sat, Alexander took in the details of the shop. Everything was clean and orderly, but he could see the wear on the fixtures, the age of the equipment. This place was hanging on by a thread. "Tell me about your operation," Alexander said. Marcus launched into an explanation of the shop, the products they sold, the customers they served, the community they supported. As he talked, his passion was evident. This wasn't just a business to him. It was a calling. "And Harold?" Alexander asked, remembering the email. "The man you mentioned, he's in the back, baking," Marcus said, his expression softening. "He's an incredible story. I found him. Well, actually, he tried to steal bread from me a few weeks ago. He was starving, desperate. But there was something about him. Instead of calling the police, I brought him inside, gave him food, a place to stay. That was generous of you. It was the right thing to do." Marcus leaned forward, and here's the amazing part. He knows how to bake. I mean really bake. He can't remember his past, had some kind of accident years ago, but his hands remember. When he works with dough, it's like watching an artist. He must have been a professional baker before, though he doesn't remember it. Alexander's interest sharpened. "May I meet him?" "Of course." Marcus stood and called toward the kitchen. "Harold, can you come out here for a minute?" There was a pause, then shuffling footsteps. A figure emerged from the kitchen, and Alexander's first impression was of age and hardship. The man was tall but stooped, his clothes dusted with flour. His hair and beard were long and gray, wild and unkempt, obscuring most of his face. He looked like he'd been living rough for years. "Harold, this is Alexander Grant. He's the investor I told you about." Harold nodded shyly, not meeting Alexander's eyes. "Pleased to meet you, sir." There was something about the voice, something that almost seemed familiar, but Alexander couldn't place it. He shook hands with Harold, noticing the same careful precision in the old man's movements that Marcus had described. "Marcus tells me you're an excellent baker," Alexander said. "I just help where I can," Harold said quietly. He seemed uncomfortable with the attention and quickly retreated to the kitchen. For the next hour, Alexander observed the shop's operation. He watched Marcus interact with customers, saw the genuine warmth and care he showed to each person who walked through the door. He watched through the kitchen doorway as Harold worked, the old man's hands moving with practiced skill as he shaped loaves. And that smell. God, that smell of fresh bread. It reminded Alexander so powerfully of his father that his chest ached. He was just about to tell Marcus that he'd decided to invest when the bell over the door chimed violently. 3 young men burst in, and the atmosphere in the shop immediately changed. Marcus's face went pale. "You need to leave, we're not paying." "Wrong answer," the one with the spider tattoo on his neck said. He moved toward the counter, and his friends spread out, flanking him. "See, we've been patient, we've been nice, but you're disrespecting us, and that can't stand." Alexander stood. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Who the hell are you?" Spider tattoo turned to him. "Some customer. Get out, this doesn't concern you." "Actually, I'm a potential investor in this business, which makes it very much my concern." "An investor?" The young man laughed. "Well, congratulations, you just invested in a place that's about to have a lot of problems." From the kitchen, Harold appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene, the 3 threatening men, Marcus's frightened face, the stranger in the suit trying to intervene. "Leave him alone," Harold said, his voice surprisingly firm. He moved toward Marcus, putting himself between the shop owner and the gang members. "The old bum's got some balls," Spider Tattoo said. "Old man, you better back off before you get hurt." "I said leave him alone." Harold stood his ground, though Alexander could see him trembling. "Harold, don't," Marcus started to say, but Spider Tattoo was already moving. He grabbed Harold by the front of his flour-covered shirt, and shoved him hard against the counter. "You don't tell me what to do, Grandpa." Marcus exploded. Years of frustration, fear, and pent-up anger erupted in that moment. He lunged at Spider Tattoo, grabbing him by the shoulders and yanking him away from Harold. "Don't you touch him," Marcus shouted. The shop erupted into chaos. Spider Tattoo's friends jumped on Marcus. Fists flew. Harold tried to pull them off, getting an elbow to the face for his trouble. Shelves were knocked over. Cans scattered across the floor. The basket of bread tumbled, loaves rolling everywhere. Alexander backed toward the door, horrified. He saw Marcus fighting like a man possessed, saw the violence and desperation. This wasn't the gentle shop owner he'd been talking to minutes ago. This was someone out of control, someone dangerous. The fight lasted maybe a minute before Spider Tattoo called his friends off. "You're done, old man." He spat at Marcus, blood dripping from his split lip. "You're so done. We'll be back, and when we come, we're burning this place to the ground." They left, slamming the door so hard the glass cracked. The shop fell silent, except for harsh breathing. Marcus stood in the middle of the destruction, his knuckles bleeding, his face flushed with adrenaline. Harold leaned against the counter, holding his jaw where he'd been hit. Alexander stared at them both, his mind racing. He thought about what he'd just witnessed. Violence, chaos, gang involvement. This wasn't a struggling business that needed help. This was a disaster waiting to happen. He thought about his father's legacy, about the promise he'd made to help people. But this wasn't what his father would have wanted. His father had believed in peaceful resolution, in kindness, in working within the system. "Mr. Grant," Marcus said, turning to him with desperate eyes. "Please, I can explain. Those men have been threatening me for weeks. I didn't want to fight, but they were going to hurt Harold." "I've seen enough," Alexander said coldly. He straightened his suit, which had somehow gotten dust on it during the chaos. "Mr. Delgado, I came here today prepared to invest in your business, but after what I just witnessed, I'm afraid I can't do that." "What?" "No, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're involved with gangs, you're violent, and this business is too much of a liability." Alexander moved toward the door. "I'm sorry, but the Grant Foundation only invests in stable, peaceable enterprises. I hope you can sort out your problems, but I can't be part of this." "Mr. Grant, please." Marcus followed him to the door. "This shop is all I have. Harold needs this place. The community needs this place. You can't." But Alexander was already outside, already climbing into his car. As it pulled away from the curb, he looked back once, and saw Marcus standing in the doorway, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Alexander settled into his seat, and closed his eyes. He felt sick. He'd wanted so badly to believe in Marcus, to believe that there were still good people doing good work who just needed a chance. But he couldn't invest in violence. He couldn't support someone who solved problems with fists instead of reason.
His father had taught him better than that. The car drove away, and Alexander tried not to think about the look of devastation on Marcus's face, or the old man Harold slumped against the counter, or the smell of fresh bread that still lingered in his nose. He told himself he'd made the right decision. He had to believe that. But somehow, it didn't feel right at all.
Back at Marcus Mart, Marcus slowly turned and surveyed the destroyed shop, cans everywhere, shelves knocked over, the crack in the window glass, his dreams shattered as completely as the breadbasket that lay broken on the floor. Harold limped over and put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, this is my fault. If I hadn't gotten involved." "No." Marcus's voice was hollow. "No, this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." But as he began cleaning up the mess, picking up scattered cans one by one, Marcus couldn't help but feel that everything, absolutely everything, had just fallen apart, and there was no way to fix it. That night Marcus insisted everything would be okay, but Harold could see through the lie. The younger man's hands shook as he swept up broken glass. His eyes were distant, calculating losses he couldn't afford. "You should rest," Harold said quietly. "Your hands are still bleeding." Marcus looked down at his knuckles, seeming surprised to find them torn and swollen. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. None of this is fine." Harold took the broom from Marcus's hands. "Go home. I'll finish cleaning up." "Harold, please, let me do this." Marcus finally nodded, too exhausted to argue. "I'll see you tomorrow." But after Marcus left, Harold didn't finish cleaning. He stood in the middle of the wrecked shop, thinking about everything that had happened, about the investor who'd left in disgust, about Marcus's last chance disappearing because of violence Harold had helped escalate. He thought about the look on Marcus's face when Grant had driven away. Devastation. Complete and utter devastation. This shop had saved Harold's life. Marcus had given him purpose, dignity, hope. And now, because of Harold's presence, because Harold had drawn those gang members' attention by defending Marcus, everything was falling apart. Harold began sweeping mechanically, his mind replaying the day's events. The way Mr. Grant had looked at the chaos, the disappointment in his eyes, the finality in his voice when he'd refused the investment. As Harold bent to pick up a piece of broken shelf, something white caught his eye near the door. A business card lying face down on the floor. He picked it up and turned it over. Alexander Grant, Chief Executive Officer, Grant Foundation. Below the name was a phone number and an address. Harold stared at it, his heart beginning to pound. Mr. Grant must have dropped it during the chaos, when he was backing toward the door, when everything had fallen apart. An address. Harold looked at the card for a long time, turning it over in his flour-dusted fingers. This was a sign, wasn't it? A chance to fix what had broken. He could go to Mr. Grant, explain properly what had happened, make him understand that Marcus wasn't a violent man, just a desperate one trying to protect someone he cared about. Harold barely slept that night. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, the business card clutched in his hand. By the time dawn light began filtering through the small window, he'd made his decision. He had to try. Harold cleaned himself up as best he could, washing his face and hands, trying to comb his wild hair and beard with his fingers. It didn't help much. He still looked like what he was, a homeless old man in borrowed clothes, but he had to try. He left early, before Marcus arrived, slipping the business card into his pocket like a talisman. The address was in a wealthy neighborhood across town, the kind of place Harold had never dared venture into during his years on the streets. He walked to the bus stop and waited with the morning commuters, feeling their eyes on him, their discomfort at his presence. When the bus came, he climbed on with the quarters he'd saved from helping out at the shop, coins Marcus had insisted on giving him even though Harold had said he didn't need money. The bus ride felt like traveling to another world. The buildings grew larger, the streets wider and cleaner, the cars more expensive. Harold watched the city transform through the bus window, feeling more and more out of place with each passing block. He got off at the stop closest to the address on the card, and walked the remaining blocks on foot. The houses here weren't just houses, they were estates, set back from the street behind gates and perfectly manicured lawns. Harold had never seen anything like it. He found the address and stopped on the sidewalk, staring up at the property. It wasn't the biggest house on the street, but it was stunning. Modern architecture of glass and steel, 3 stories tall, with a long driveway leading to a security gate. Beyond the gate, he could see a well-lit entrance with a sleek black door. Harold's courage nearly failed him. What was he thinking?
Men like Alexander Grant didn't talk to men like him. They looked through him, around him, but never at him. But then he thought of Marcus's face. He thought of everything Marcus had sacrificed to help someone he didn't even know. If Marcus could show that kind of courage, that kind of kindness, surely Harold could find the strength to walk up to a door. Harold approached the gate slowly. There was an intercom system with a camera mounted on the post. He raised his hand to press the button, then hesitated. What would he even say? "Hello, I'm the homeless man from the bakery. Please let me in to plead my case." His hand dropped back to his side. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he should just go back to the shop, except that some things couldn't be fixed. But then he looked at the business card again, at the address that had led him here, and something made him reach out one more time. Not to the intercom button, his courage failed him there, but to the gate itself, just to steady himself while he gathered his thoughts. The moment his fingers touched the sleek metal panel beside the gate, something clicked. A soft beep sounded, and the gate began to swing open smoothly, silently. Harold jerked his hand back, startled. He looked around expecting to see someone, expecting security guards to come running. But the grounds were empty, quiet except for the whisper of the gate's mechanism. Had he done that? How? He stared at the panel where his hand had been. There was a small screen embedded in it, dark now, but he could see the outline of what looked like a fingerprint scanner. That couldn't be right. Why would a fingerprint scanner open for him? He'd never been here before. This made no sense. Harold stood frozen, the open gate before him like an invitation, or a test, or a trap. He should leave. This was trespassing. If he went through that gate, if he approached the house, he could be arrested. He could end up in jail, and then where would Marcus be? Who would help Marcus if Harold was locked up? But the gate had opened for him. His fingerprints had somehow been recognized by this system. How was that possible? Harold's hands began to tremble. Somewhere in the fog of his lost memories, something stirred. A feeling of familiarity, of belonging, that he couldn't explain. He looked back down the street, at the bus stop in the distance. He could walk away right now. Forget this ever happened, go back to the shop and accept whatever came next. Or he could walk through that gate and find out why it had opened for him. Harold took a deep breath and stepped forward. The driveway was smooth beneath his worn shoes, the landscaping perfect and pristine. He felt like he was walking through someone else's dream, a world that had nothing to do with the life he'd known for the past 10 years. As he approached the house, the front door came into view, modern, imposing, with another panel beside it, another security system. Harold's heart hammered in his chest. He was really doing this. He was really here. He climbed the 3 steps to the entrance and stood before the door, his hand raised to knock. But before his knuckles could touch the wood, he noticed the panel, another fingerprint scanner, glowing softly blue in the morning light. Harold stared at it. The gate had recognized him. Would this do the same? Almost against his will, his hand moved toward the scanner. His fingers trembled as they pressed against the smooth surface. Another beep, another soft click. The door swung open. Harold stood on the threshold, staring into a beautiful foyer with high ceilings and modern art on the walls. His breath came in short gasps. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible, but the door was open, and somewhere inside, Alexander Grant was probably already calling security, watching this homeless intruder on his cameras, preparing to have him arrested. Harold should run. He should turn around and run. But his feet carried him forward instead, crossing the threshold into the house, into a mystery he didn't understand but couldn't ignore. "Hello," his voice echoed in the vast space. "Mr. Grant, I'm sorry for intruding. The gate, the door, they just opened. I have your business card. I came to talk about Marcus. Please don't call the police. I can explain." Footsteps sounded from somewhere deeper in the house, rapid and urgent. Harold stood in the center of the foyer, an old man in ragged clothes standing in a palace, waiting to be thrown out or worse. But he'd made it this far. He'd walked through gates that shouldn't have opened. He'd entered a house that had somehow recognized him. And now whatever happened next, at least he'd tried, at least he'd been brave enough to try. The footsteps grew louder, and Harold squared his shoulders, preparing to face Alexander Grant and whatever consequences came with this impossible intrusion. Alexander Grant appeared at the top of the stairs, his phone already in his hand. He was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, clearly having been home for the evening. His eyes widened when he saw Harold standing in his foyer. "What the how did you get in here?" Alexander demanded, his finger hovering over the phone screen. I'm calling the police right now. Please don't. Harold raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. I know how this looks. I know I shouldn't be here. But your gate opened for me. Your door opened. I didn't break in, I swear. That's impossible. Alexander descended the stairs slowly, his eyes never leaving Harold. Those systems only recognize authorized fingerprints. There's no way. I know it sounds crazy, Harold said desperately, but I'm telling the truth. Look at your security footage. I just touched the panel, and everything opened. I came here because you dropped your business card at the shop. I wanted to talk to you about Marcus, to explain what really happened. I wasn't trying to break in. Alexander stopped at the bottom of the stairs, studying Harold with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. Show me the card. Harold pulled the slightly crumpled business card from his pocket and held it out. Alexander took it, examined it, then looked back at Harold with narrowed eyes. Wait here, don't move. Alexander disappeared into a side room. Harold stood frozen in the foyer, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He could hear Alexander's voice, muffled, speaking to someone, probably security, probably the police. This was it. He was going to jail. And Marcus would lose everything because Harold had been foolish enough to think he could fix this. But then Alexander emerged from the room, his phone lowered, his expression completely changed. The suspicion was gone, replaced by something Harold couldn't identify. Shock maybe, or disbelief. Come with me, Alexander said quietly. What? Come with me. Now Alexander's voice was strange, tight with emotion. I need to show you something. Harold followed him down a hallway into what appeared to be a home office. Screens lined one wall, showing security footage from multiple angles, the gate, the driveway, the entrance. Alexander pulled up the recording from 20 minutes ago. Harold watched himself on the screen, approaching the gate, hesitating, then touching the panel. The timestamp showed exactly when the gate had opened. Now watch this, Alexander said, his voice shaking. He pulled up another window on the screen, showing data from the security system. This is the access log. It shows who entered and when. He pointed to the most recent entry. Harold leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The entry read, Franklin Grant EO, authorized, access, 7:42 a.m. I don't understand, Harold whispered. Who's Franklin Grant? Alexander turned to face him, and Harold saw tears streaming down the man's face. My father, Alexander said, his voice breaking. Franklin Grant is my father. He disappeared 10 years ago. I programmed his fingerprints into the security system when I built this house 5 years ago. I couldn't bring myself to delete them. I kept hoping that somehow, someday, he stopped, unable to continue. Harold felt the room tilt around him. That's not possible. My name is Harold. I'm nobody. I've been on the streets for 10 years. I don't remember anything before the accident. What accident? Alexander grabbed Harold's shoulders, his grip urgent. Tell me about the accident. I woke up in a hospital. The doctors said I'd been in a car crash, that I'd been unconscious for 3 weeks. I couldn't remember who I was. No one came for me. They released me with nowhere to go. When was this? 10 years ago. Maybe a little more. I don't remember the exact date. Alexander's hands dropped to his sides. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a framed photograph. He held it out to Harold with trembling hands. Is this you? Harold looked at the photograph. It showed a man in his 50s, clean-shaven with neat gray hair, wearing a baker's apron and smiling at the camera. Behind him was a small bakery with a sign that read Grant's Bread. Harold stared at the face. There was something familiar about it, something that called to him through the fog of lost years. The shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the way the man stood with quiet confidence. I don't know, Harold said, but his voice lacked certainty. Alexander set down the photo and moved to a cabinet against the wall. He opened it and carefully removed a wooden box. Inside, Harold could see something preserved, a loaf of bread, old and dried but intact. This was the last bread my father baked before he disappeared, Alexander said softly. I've kept it all these years. He taught me everything about bread, about baking, about helping people. He looked up at Harold with desperate hope in his eyes. You knew how to make bread. Marcus said you knew things you couldn't explain, that your hands remembered even when your mind didn't. Harold's own hands began to shake. Memories flickered at the edges of his consciousness. A young boy with bright eyes asking questions, the smell of yeast and flour, a promise made about always helping those in need. "I need to be sure," Alexander said. He moved to his desk and pulled out a small device, the same fingerprint scanner Harold had seen him use at the shop. "Give me your hand." Harold held out his hand, and Alexander pressed his fingers against the scanner. The blue light swept across them, and the device beeped. Both men stared at the screen as data appeared. Fingerprint match, 99.9% probability. Identity, Franklin Grant. "Oh God," Alexander whispered. "Dad, oh God, it's really you." Harold Franklin felt something crack open inside him. The dam that had held back 10 years of memories began to crumble. Images flooded through his mind. A small boy learning to knead dough, a promise made to always help those in need, a woman's laugh, a life filled with purpose and love and meaning. Alexander, the name fell from his lips, and it felt right. It felt true, yes. Alexander moved closer, his hands reaching out to touch Franklin's face, as if he couldn't quite believe he was real. "Yes, Dad, it's me. You've been gone for 10 years. I searched everywhere. I never stopped looking. I never stopped hoping." Franklin's legs gave out, and Alexander caught him, lowering them both to the floor. They sat there, father and son, both crying, both trying to understand how this was possible. "I'm sorry," Franklin said through his tears. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean to forget." "You didn't forget," Alexander said fiercely. "You couldn't help what happened. The accident took your memory, but it didn't take who you are. You kept helping people, you kept making bread, you kept being exactly the man you always were, even when you didn't remember being him." Franklin looked down at his hands, the hands that had known how to make bread, even when his mind couldn't remember why, the hands that had touched a security panel, and opened gates to a home he didn't remember owning access to, the hands that had shaped dough beside Marcus for weeks without understanding that this skill was part of who he'd been before. "Marcus," Franklin said suddenly, looking up at Alexander, "that's why I came here. We have to help him. He saved my life. He gave me dignity when I had nothing. We can't let him lose everything." Alexander helped his father to his feet. "I know, I understand that now. When I saw you at the shop, I didn't recognize you. How could I? You looked so different, and I wasn't expecting. I never imagined." He wiped his eyes. "But you're here now. We found each other, and yes, we're going to help Marcus. We're going to help him because that's what you taught me to do." Franklin looked around the office, at the screens showing his own approach to the house, at the photograph of the man he used to be, at the wooden box with its preserved bread. "I don't look like that anymore," he said quietly, touching his wild beard, his matted hair. "No wonder you didn't know me. We can fix that," Alexander said gently, "if you want to, but first tell me everything. Tell me about the last 10 years. Tell me how you ended up at Marcus's shop." So Franklin did. He told his son about waking up in the hospital with no past, about the years on the streets, about the desperate hunger that had driven him to steal a loaf of bread from a small shop on a cold December night. He told about Marcus's kindness, about being given a second chance, about hands that remembered skills his mind had forgotten. Alexander listened to every word, his hand never leaving his father's shoulder, as if afraid that if he let go, Franklin might disappear again. "You went through all that alone," Alexander said when Franklin finished. "For 10 years you suffered, and I couldn't find you. I couldn't help you. But someone did help me," Franklin said. "Marcus helped me, and now because of his kindness, I'm here. We're together again. Don't you see, everything that happened, all the pain, all the loss, it led to this moment. It brought us back together." Alexander nodded slowly. "Then we owe Marcus everything, and we're going to make sure he knows that. But first," Franklin said, looking down at his ragged appearance, "I need to look like your father again. When we go back to Marcus, I want him to see Franklin Grant, not just Harold the homeless man, but the person I really am. Can we do that?" "Yes," Alexander said, pulling his father into another tight embrace. "We can do that. We can do anything now. We're together again." They stood there in the office, holding on to each other, both still crying, both still trying to believe in the miracle that had just unfolded. Outside, the sun rose higher over Chicago, casting light through the windows, illuminating the photograph on the desk, a baker smiling at the camera. frozen in a moment before everything changed. But now, 10 years later, everything was changing again. For the better this time. For good. 2 hours later, Franklin sat in the most expensive salon in downtown Chicago, watching his transformation in the mirror. Alexander had made a single phone call, and the salon had opened its doors immediately, despite the early hour. The stylist worked carefully, her scissors snipping away years of neglect. The wild gray hair was trimmed and shaped. The thick matted beard, that had hidden Franklin's face for so long, was carefully shaved away, revealing the features that had been obscured. Franklin watched in the mirror as a stranger, no, not a stranger, himself, emerged. He was older than the man in the photograph, with deeper lines around his eyes and more gray in his hair, but it was unmistakably the same person. The same face that Alexander had been searching for. "There you are," Alexander said softly, standing behind the chair. He met his father's eyes in the mirror, and fresh tears spilled down both their faces. "There's my dad." The barber stepped back, her own eyes moist. She seemed to understand that she was witnessing something significant, even if she didn't know the full story. "Thank you," Franklin said to her, his voice rough with emotion. He touched his smooth jaw, hardly recognizing the feeling. "Thank you so much." After the salon, Alexander took his father to a clothing store. Franklin protested. His old clothes were fine, he said, but Alexander insisted. "You're Franklin Grant," Alexander said firmly. "My father, a master baker, a man who built a business and raised a son and helped countless people. You deserve to look the part." So Franklin allowed himself to be outfitted in new clothes, nothing too fancy, just clean slacks and a comfortable shirt, a warm jacket that actually fit. When he looked at himself in the dressing room mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. He looked respectable, dignified, human. "Better?" Alexander asked when Franklin emerged. "Different," Franklin said. "I'm not sure I've earned the right to look like this anymore." "You've earned everything," Alexander said. "Come on, we have somewhere to be." As they drove back toward the south side, Franklin watched the city pass by outside the car window. He'd walked these streets for 10 years, invisible and forgotten. Now he was seeing them from inside a luxury car, clean and well-dressed, with his son beside him. "Are you nervous?" Alexander asked.
Terrified, Franklin admitted. "Marcus showed me kindness when I was Harold, a homeless nobody. Now I'm going to walk in there as someone completely different. Will he feel betrayed? Will he think I lied to him?" "You didn't lie, you didn't know. That doesn't make it easier." Franklin paused. "He saved my life, Alexander. He gave me purpose when I had nothing, and I didn't even know who I really was. How do you thank someone for that?" "We're about to find out," Alexander said, as they pulled up in front of Marcus Mart. Through the window they could see Marcus inside, sweeping the floor. He was alone in the shop, still cleaning up from yesterday's disaster. The sight made Franklin's heart ache. "Ready?" Alexander asked. Franklin took a deep breath. "Ready?" They got out of the car and approached the shop. Franklin's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. This place had been his sanctuary, his home. Marcus had been his savior, and now everything was about to change. The bell chimed as they entered. Marcus looked up from his sweeping and his eyes widened when he saw Alexander. "Mr. Grant," Marcus said, surprise and confusion clear in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I know." Alexander stepped aside, revealing Franklin behind him. "But first there's someone I think you should meet." Marcus looked at the man standing beside Alexander. He saw a well-dressed older gentleman with neat gray hair and a clean-shaven face. For a moment there was no recognition. Then something in the man's eyes, something in the way he stood, made Marcus's breath catch. "Harold," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Is that you?" Franklin stepped forward, tears already streaming down his face. "My name isn't Harold, Marcus. It's Franklin. Franklin Grant." He gestured to Alexander. "This is my son. And because of your kindness, because you saved me when you didn't have to, because you treated a homeless man like he mattered, we found each other again." The broom fell from Marcus's hands, clattering loudly on the floor. He just stood there, staring, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't understand. How is this possible?" "It's a long story," Franklin said gently. "Can we sit? I'd like to tell you everything." Marcus nodded mutely and led them to the small table where they'd shared so many conversations. As they sat, Franklin began to explain about the accident 10 years ago, the lost memories, the years on the streets. He told about coming to Alexander's house, about the gate and door opening for his fingerprints, about the security system that still remembered Franklin Grant even after a decade. "The accident took my memory," Franklin said, "but it didn't take my fingerprints. It didn't take the skills my hands remembered. And it didn't take who I was inside, the man my father raised me to be, even though I couldn't remember him." Alexander picked up the story, explaining about the 10-year search. The Grant Foundation started in his father's honor, the investments in bakeries, because that's what his father would have wanted. "When I came here yesterday," Alexander said, his voice heavy with regret, "I saw violence and chaos, and I judged you for it. I thought you were reckless, dangerous, but I was wrong. My father explained everything. Those men were threatening you, threatening him. You were protecting someone you cared about. That's not recklessness, that's courage." Marcus listened to it all, his eyes moving between Franklin and Alexander, trying to reconcile Harold the homeless baker with Franklin Grant, the missing father of a billionaire. "You were sleeping in my storage room," Marcus said finally, his voice wondering. "You were eating leftover bread and sweeping my floors, and all this time you were—" "I was exactly who you saw," Franklin said firmly. "I was a man who needed help. The fact that I used to be someone else, that I had a life before, that doesn't change what you did for me. You saved my life, Marcus. You gave me dignity and purpose and hope. You didn't do it because you thought I was important. You did it because you're a good man. Your grandmother would be proud," Alexander added. "My father told me about her, about how she taught you to bake, about the dream she had of owning a business. She raised you to see people, to help people. That's a rare and precious thing." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I just did what felt right." "Exactly," Franklin said. "And now we want to do what feels right. We want to help you save this shop. Not because we owe you, though we do, but because this place matters. You matter. What you're building here matters." Alexander pulled out his phone and opened a document. "I've prepared an investment proposal. $50,000 immediately, enough to cover your rent increase for the next 2 years, upgrade your equipment, and hire security to deal with those gang members. In return, the Grant Foundation takes a 20% stake in Marcus Mart." He turned the phone so Marcus could see the numbers. "But that's just the beginning. We want to expand the model. Turn this shop into a community hub, a place that not only sells bread but helps people. Job training, meals for those in need, a safe space for the neighborhood. My father will work here as master baker, if you'll have him. His name, his story will draw customers from all over the city." Marcus stared at the phone, at the numbers that would solve all his problems. Then he looked at Franklin, at this man he'd known as Harold, who'd worked beside him for weeks making bread, who'd never asked for anything more than a place to sleep and a chance to be useful. "You really want to stay?" Marcus asked. "Even now that you remember everything? Even now that you could do anything, go anywhere?" Franklin reached across the table and took Marcus's hand. "Where else would I want to be? This shop saved my life. You saved my life. I spent 10 years wandering in darkness, and you gave me light. Why would I want to leave that? Besides," Alexander added with a small smile, "someone needs to teach me how to bake properly, and I have a feeling my father's going to insist on doing that here, where it matters." Marcus looked between them, at the father and son who'd found each other because of bread and kindness, and an impossible series of coincidences that felt like something more than coincidence. "My grandmother used to say that God works in mysterious ways," Marcus said softly. "She said that sometimes what looks like bad luck is really a blessing in disguise. I never understood what she meant, until now." He stood up and Franklin and Alexander stood with him. Marcus held out his hand to Alexander first. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for seeing past yesterday, for giving me another chance, for understanding what this place means." They shook hands and then Marcus turned to Franklin. But instead of offering his hand, he pulled the older man into a tight embrace. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, "for trusting me, for working beside me, for being exactly who you were, even when you didn't know who that was. You made me a better person, Harold. Franklin, whoever you are, you made me better." Franklin hugged him back, both men crying openly now. "You gave me back my life,"
Franklin said. Both of them. The one I'd forgotten, and the one I was living. How can I ever repay that? You already have, Marcus said. Just by being here, just by staying. They stood there in the small shop, three men bound together by bread and kindness, and the understanding that sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest acts of compassion. Outside, Chicago carried on with its business, unaware that something miraculous was unfolding within these humble walls. But inside Marcus Mart, in a shop that had almost failed, in a place where a homeless man had once stolen bread out of desperation, hope was being reborn. And tomorrow, when the ovens fired up and the bread began to rise, the smell would carry through the neighborhood like a promise. Things were going to be different now. Things were going to be better, because three men had chosen kindness over judgment, because a son had never stopped searching for his father, because a shop owner had seen a hungry man and decided to help instead of punish, and because sometimes, against all odds, lost things find their way home. The news broke the next morning. Marcus arrived at the shop early, as always, and found a crowd already gathering outside. News vans lined the street, reporters setting up cameras, people clustered on the sidewalk talking excitedly. "What's going on?" Marcus asked a woman he recognized as a regular customer. "You haven't seen?" She held up her phone, showing him the headline, "Billionaire finds missing father working as homeless baker, the miracle on Chicago's South Side." Marcus's hands shook as he unlocked the shop. Inside, his phone was already ringing. He answered to find Alexander on the other end. "I'm sorry," Alexander said. "I tried to keep it quiet, but someone at the salon must have talked. The story's everywhere. Are you okay?" "I think so," Marcus said, watching more people gather outside. "There are reporters everywhere." "I know. Dad and I are on our way. We'll handle this together. Don't talk to anyone until we get there." 20 minutes later, Alexander's car pulled up. Franklin emerged first, dressed simply but neatly, looking every inch the master baker he'd once been. The crowd surged forward, questions flying, cameras flashing. Alexander raised his hand for quiet. "We'll make a statement. Please give us a moment." Marcus opened the door, and they slipped inside. Through the window they could see the crowd growing larger by the minute. "This is too much," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "I'm not ready for this kind of attention." "Neither am I," Franklin admitted. "But Alexander's right. This attention will help save the shop. People want to be part of something good. We just need to give them that chance." At 9 a.m. they stepped outside to face the cameras. Alexander spoke first, his voice clear and strong. 10 years ago, my father Franklin Grant disappeared after a car accident. He suffered severe head trauma and memory loss. For the past decade, he's been living on the streets of Chicago, forgotten by everyone except one man. He gestured to Marcus. "Marcus Delgado, the owner of this shop, found my father at his lowest point. Instead of calling the police when my father tried to steal bread, Marcus showed him compassion. He gave him food, shelter and work. He treated him with dignity and respect. And in doing so he made it possible for our family to be reunited." The reporters shouted questions, but Franklin stepped forward, and the crowd quieted. "I want to say something," Franklin said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "For 10 years I was invisible. I lived on these streets, and people looked through me like I didn't exist. But Marcus saw me. He treated me like a human being. And I want everyone watching this to remember, there are thousands of people living on our streets right now. They're somebody's father, somebody's mother, somebody's child. They're not invisible. They're not nothing. They deserve to be seen. They deserve kindness." He paused, emotion making his voice thick. "If you take nothing else from this story, please take that. Look at the people others ignore. See them. Help them. Because you never know that homeless person you pass on the street might be someone's father, waiting to come home." The crowd was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Others joined in, and soon the applause was thunderous. Alexander held up his hand again. "The Grant Foundation is proud to announce a major investment in Marcus Mart. But we're also establishing the Franklin Grant Community Kitchen, which will provide free meals to anyone in need. No questions asked. Because that's what my father taught me. When you have the means to help, you help. Period." The reporters surged forward with more questions, but Alexander Franklin and Marcus retreated into the shop. Through the window, they watched as the first customers of the day began forming a line that stretched down the block. "Are you ready for this?" Franklin asked Marcus. Marcus took a deep breath and tied on his apron. "Let's make some bread." They spent the day working side by side, just as they had before, except now the shop was packed with customers. Some came out of curiosity, some because of the story, but all of them left with bread and hope. The sense that they'd been part of something meaningful. Between the lunch and dinner rush, a police car pulled up outside. Marcus tensed, but Franklin put a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, watch." 2 officers entered the shop, and behind them, hands cuffed, was Spider Tattoo and his 2 friends. "Marcus Delgado," the lead officer asked. "That's me. We're here to inform you that these 3 men have been arrested for extortion, assault and racketeering. Mr. Grant's lawyers provided us with evidence of their activities across multiple businesses in this neighborhood. They won't be bothering you, or anyone else anymore." Marcus looked at the 3 men who'd made his life hell for months. Spider Tattoo's face was sullen, defeated. All the swagger was gone. "Thank you, officers," Marcus said quietly. As they led the men away, Franklin moved to stand beside Marcus. "It's over. That part of your life is over. Thanks to you, thanks to both of you." "Thanks to you first," Franklin corrected. "None of this happens if you don't show kindness to a hungry old man." Over the next week, Marcus Mart transformed. Alexander's investment allowed them to expand into the empty space next door. They installed new ovens, hired 3 additional staff members, and renovated the interior. But more than the physical changes, it was the atmosphere that shifted. The shop became a gathering place. The Franklin Grant Community Kitchen opened its doors, serving hot meals twice a day to anyone who needed them. Franklin worked both sides, baking in Marcus Mart during the morning, serving meals in the kitchen during lunch and dinner. Marcus watched him interact with the homeless people who came for food, saw the gentle respect Franklin showed them, the way he looked each person in the eye, and treated them like they mattered. "You remember being them," Marcus said one evening after the dinner service ended. "I was them," Franklin corrected. "A month ago I was on the other side of that counter. I know what it feels like to be hungry, to be invisible, to wonder if anyone would care if you just disappeared. I can't forget that. I don't want to forget that." Alexander, who'd been helping serve meals alongside his father, nodded. "I've learned more in the past week about real poverty, real struggle, than I learned in 10 years of running a foundation. Seeing it through your eyes, Dad, it's changed me." "Good," Franklin said simply. "That's what suffering should do. It should make us kinder, not harder." One Saturday morning, 3 months after the reunion, Marcus stood in his expanded shop and looked around with satisfaction. The morning rush was in full swing. Franklin worked at the main oven, teaching Alexander the finer points of bread making. Their new employees, including 2 formerly homeless men Franklin had personally recruited and trained, moved efficiently through their tasks. Through the window, Marcus could see the line of customers stretching down the block, could see the sign for the community kitchen next door, could see the transformed neighborhood where other businesses, inspired by their success, had begun to invest and rebuild. A customer approached the counter, a young woman with a baby on her hip. "I've been coming here every week since I heard the story," she said as Marcus rang up her order. "My husband lost his job 6 months ago, and we've been struggling. But seeing what you did, how you helped someone when you barely had anything yourself, it gave us hope. Made us believe that good people still exist." "They do," Marcus said, handing her the bag of bread. "They're everywhere, sometimes we just have to look." That evening after the shop closed, Marcus, Franklin and Alexander sat together at their usual table. It had become a ritual, this time each day when they reflected on what they'd accomplished and planned for tomorrow. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, "about expanding this model, taking what we've built here and replicating it in other neighborhoods, other cities. Small investments in good people doing good work, paired with community support services." "The Grant Delgado Initiative," Marcus suggested, echoing the conversation they'd had weeks ago. "Actually," Franklin said, "I was thinking we should call it something else. Something that reminds us where this all started." He smiled. "The Bread and Kindness Project, because at the end of the day, that's what saved us all. Bread and kindness." They raised their coffee cups in a toast. "To bread and kindness," Marcus said. To second chances, Alexander added. To family, Franklin finished. Old family and new family, blood family and chosen family. As they drank, Marcus thought about his grandmother, wondered if somehow she was watching, if she knew that her dream of owning a bakery had led to all of this. He liked to think she did. He liked to think she was proud. Later that night, as Marcus locked up the shop, he paused at the door and looked back one more time. On the counter, illuminated by the security lights, sat a basket of bread, fresh loaves ready for tomorrow's customers. The bread that had saved a life, the bread that had reunited a family, the bread that had transformed a neighborhood. His grandmother had been right. Angels came in many forms. Sometimes they looked like homeless men with wild beards. Sometimes they looked like billionaires in expensive suits. And sometimes they looked like yourself, reflected in a window, wondering if you had the courage to help someone in need. Marcus smiled and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight he would sleep peacefully, knowing he'd honored his grandmother's memory in the best way possible. By choosing kindness, by seeing people, by believing that one person really could change the world, one loaf of bread at a time. 3 blocks away in his penthouse apartment, Alexander stood at the window with his father beside him, looking out over the city they both loved. "What are you thinking about?" Franklin asked. "About how close I came to walking away that day at the shop. How close I came to letting my fear and judgment keep me from seeing the truth." "But you didn't walk away," Franklin said, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. "When I came to your house, when I knocked on your door, even though I didn't know it was my door, you listened. You investigated, you opened your heart to the possibility that you'd been wrong. That takes courage too. You taught me that. All those years ago before I lost you, you taught me to question my assumptions, to look deeper, to choose compassion over certainty." Franklin smiled. "Then I did something right." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there people were struggling, hurting, hoping. But tomorrow in a small shop on the south side, bread would rise in the ovens, filling the air with the smell of possibility. It wasn't a perfect solution to the world's problems. It was just bread and kindness and 3 men who decided to try. But sometimes, trying is enough. Sometimes, one small act of compassion sets off a chain reaction that changes everything. And sometimes, against all odds and reason, lost things find their way home. "I love you, Dad," Alexander said quietly. "I love you too, son," Franklin replied. "Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for keeping the faith." "Always," Alexander said. "Always." In the morning they would return to the shop. Franklin would teach his son to knead dough with just the right pressure. Marcus would serve customers with his characteristic warmth. The community kitchen would feed people who needed it, and the cycle would continue. Bread and kindness, kindness and bread, one leading to the other in an endless beautiful spiral. But tonight father and son stood together, whole again, proof that miracles still happen in the modern world. You just have to have the courage to see them, and the wisdom to help when help is needed, and the faith to believe that every person you meet, no matter how lost they seem, might be exactly where they need to be to find their way home.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.